If you go to some real estate community forums like Bigger Pockets or the like, you are probably going to find some people that criticize turnkey investing as a bad way to invest. And you'll probably find a fair share of horror stories, just as in any investing methodology. Now, not everybody is going to feel negative about it, but there's a lot of people that do. Well, I'm here to tell you, when I talk to people that had a bad experience with a turnkey investment, and I really dig into their experience and find out what they did and what their journey looked like, in every single case, I have been able to pinpoint where they went wrong. There was a mistake that they made somewhere along the way, and it's relatively easy to find those mistakes and point them out and make it so that others don't fall into those same traps. In this video, I'm going to break down the most common mistakes that I've seen investors make when they invest in turnkey properties. Based on everything I've learned as I built my own portfolio of cash flowing rental properties, and as I've helped others do the same. So keep watching, because you're going to learn how you can avoid making these same mistakes and how to really maximize the odds that your investment will continue to provide lucrative returns for a long, long time to come. I'm Jim Bevins, a 30-year engineering veteran with a long-standing love of real estate, and I finally found the key to be able to build a portfolio of cash-flowing rental properties while working a demanding career, and I'm here to show how you can do it too. So there are three main categories of mistakes that I see people make when they get into turnkey investing. The first big category is related to not taking the proper steps to ensure that you can last through any troubles that come up. Because the truth is, there are only two ways you can lose in the game of real estate. You either quit or you get knocked out of the game. That's it. If you have the resources to make it through any short-term hiccups, over time, any real estate investment will be a winner. I don't care how bad the purchase was. With enough time and enough resources, it will turn into a win. Okay? The last 100 years of this real estate market bears that out. Even the people that bought right before 2008, if they were able to hold on, they are doing just great today, right? Okay, so the first big mistake I see people make is get into real estate investing and not establish adequate reserves. Okay? Reserves are key. This is what will keep you from getting knocked out. So as soon as you get your first property under contract, one thing you're going to want to do is start setting up your business checking accounts so that you can start having funds go in and out of these accounts. And the first thing you should do is put in reserves in those accounts so that any expenses come straight out of those reserves and out of those accounts. As a general rule of thumb, I recommend 3 mortgage payments per property plus one lump sum of anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, depending on what your resources are like. $5,000 to $10,000 per 5 properties. So just some lump sum that if something major happens across one of those 5 properties, that you've got it covered and it's not going to impact you. Between that and having your multiple mortgage payments, and if you got 5 properties, that's like 15 mortgage payments. So that's a decent amount of reserves you have, and that is what is going to help you smooth out the ride. So this is key to not getting knocked out of the game. The second mistake that can knock you out of the game is buying just one property and then stopping. Scale is key. Scale is how this methodology really works. If you talk to people that are former real estate owners and they have a very negative opinion about it, they'll share their story about their frustrations and how it was a hassle and it just didn't work and they poured money into it and they just eventually had to sell their property or get out or whatever. I want you to ask them this. Ask them this one question. How many properties did they own? And I'm willing to bet that 90% of the people out there that have a negative experience with real estate only owned 1 or 2 properties. And only owning one property is the riskiest place to be. You have just a sliver of cash flow and all your risk is concentrated in that one property. If any one thing happens, it can wipe out months of cash flow. Even getting to 2 or 3 properties gives you breathing room, because now you've doubled or tripled your cash flow while spreading out your risks simultaneously. So if something happens to one of your properties, you have 2 to 3x the amount of money to take care of it. The third common mistake I want you to avoid is when you're looking at a property's performance, don't look at just the cash flow. Too many people will fall into the trap of something bad happens to their property. A tenant moves out. Maybe a tenant causes some damage and moves out, and they have an expensive make ready. And it tanks their cash flow. And it sucks. It can happen. But the big mistake people make is they look at that and they say, well, I'm hosed. This was a horrible investment. Why did I ever do this? Okay? That is the mistake that can get you to quit, right? So we already talked about the other things that keep you from getting knocked out. This is the kind of mentality that can lead to quitting. And so the key to not falling into that trap is to look at all 4 profit pillars. If you are looking at your property's performance and you're assessing how it's going, you need to not just look at cash flow. You need to look at appreciation. You need to look at the principal pay down, and you need to look at the tax savings you've achieved. Okay? When you factor all those in, usually that cash flow is going to be not as, any cash flow hit you take is going to be small compared to all the benefits you're getting. Even just owning a property 1 or 2 years, and if it just appreciates a few percent per year, you're probably sitting on a good $10,000 of equity that you didn't have before. And so you might spend $5,000 on a really tough make ready that's hard to swallow, but you're probably still ahead of the game. And so that's why we establish these reserves, so that you can, ride those waves and smooth out that process while still benefiting from all of the return opportunities that real estate offers, right? So don't just focus on cash flow. Look at all 4 pillars anytime you're assessing a property. And if you're thinking of quitting or backing out, go and run the numbers, because I'm willing to bet you will be surprised at what you see. So those are the mistakes you want to avoid to keep from quitting or getting knocked out of the game, okay? The second main category of mistakes I see people make are related to a particular investment that they make. And this all falls under that blunder of not following what I call my buy right formula, right? This is following all the components of buying a good property, which is who you buy from, where you buy from, and what you buy. You want to buy a good property from a good turnkey provider in a good area. And all of these mistakes kind of fall under these categories. So the first no-no in buying a turnkey property is buying from a national turnkey marketer instead of a local provider with boots on the ground. Now, if you do work with such a company, and if you can get them to introduce you to the local provider and establish that relationship, that can sometimes work. But they're not often very motivated to do this because they have a fear that you're going to just go around them and start working directly with them, and they're not going to get a commission, okay? It can sometimes work, but I'll also add, my second problem with national marketers is that if a turnkey provider has been in business for any length of time, like, multiple years, which is what you want them to have proven systems in place. You want them to have all the kinks out and just be cranking out these properties, as just like it's nothing to them, which to a lot of these companies, that's what it's like. Well, if a company has been in business like that for a long time, they should have their own network of investors, and they should have their own network of buyers and their own, means of selling their inventory. And if they are turning to a marketer to sell the properties, that means one of 2 things. Either they are not established and they don't have that network of buyers because they are relatively new, which is a red flag, or the properties you are seeing by the time it gets to these national marketers are the ones that nobody else wanted. Does that make sense? In other words, they put it out to their local buyers, their local investors, even their national email list that they have. And if nobody wanted it, then it's like, okay, then they give it to their national marketer. So you are seeing kind of the leftovers, right? The best deals happen at the source. You want to get as close to the source of the deals as possible, and that means working with the local turnkey providers. So I just hear a lot of horror stories from people that buy properties from these national marketers like Rent to Retirement. And I know there's lots of success stories too, and I'm probably, maybe get some bad comments or something because people will prove me wrong. But trust me, it goes both ways. So I just like to again, it's about maximizing the odds of success. Stuff happens in real estate. Something's probably going to happen at some point, but I want to do everything I can to maximize my odds of success. And the maximum odds of success are working with the local turnkey providers, okay? Now, I've done my own research for my community inside Cashflow Engineers, where I've actually went into like 12 different cities and looked for local turnkey providers. And I have a list of 26 local turnkey providers in 12 different markets that are, they are the boots on the ground, and they are available to start forming relationships with. And I haven't necessarily vetted all of them. I haven't worked with all of them, but I just did that groundwork to see how easy is it to find turnkey providers. And it has never been easier to find and form relationships with as many turnkey providers as you can handle. Okay, so the second way to screw up the buy right formula is to buy based only on the turnkey provider. You find a great turnkey provider, you have some great conversations, you vet them, ask them all sorts of questions, and then they feed you properties and you think, oh, these guys are going to take care of me, and you just buy a property based solely on the turnkey's reputation. Don't do that. This is me. I did this, okay? During COVID, finding deals was really hard. Everybody was buying real estate. Turnkey providers, as soon as they sent their inventory out, they were gone in minutes. And from all cash buyers, right, that were just willing to close in like 2 weeks. And so it was hard to find deals. I pivoted from the market I had been active. I pivoted to a new market, and I started working with a turnkey provider that the owner of this company was actually also ran this investor group I was in. And he was actually, one thing he did was, as kind of a premium version of this investor group, he would actually take money you could buy into getting access to his inventory. And that's what I did, because it was so hard to buy properties. I actually paid money so that I could be in his premium program and actually get access to his inventory. Well, this was a great turnkey provider. I mean, so there were multiple factors. For one thing, he was very highly respected inside the community. Lots of success stories, tons of success stories, very few criticisms. And you know what? I paid money. So it's like, surely they're going to take care of me, right? It's like they're going to give me like the best of the best, right? Well, not so much. This was in an area, again, I had never been to, never visited. I already had 3 properties under my belt. So I thought I knew it all and thought, nope, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to buy it. The numbers look great. I'm going to get my 4th property and keep going. Well, there were problems almost from day one. The tenant, as soon as they moved in, they just stopped paying rent. They never did make a rent payment. And so we eventually had to evict him. It wasn't all that bad. He didn't really trash the house. The house was still in good shape. I got out with all my fingers and toes intact. So it wasn't a huge deal, but it did make me look and think, where did I go wrong? What could I do differently to not do that again? And that was the conclusion I came up to was, maybe I shouldn't just rely on the turnkey provider. Maybe I should do my own research and actually apply my own buying criteria, right? So that is the second mistake, is use your own buying criteria, okay? Now, getting back to this property, the third mistake is relating to not paying attention to what type of property you're buying. And that is the second part of the mistake I made. It turns out the area that I bought this property, it wasn't that bad. It really wasn't bad. I did later fly out and visit, and I toured that area a little bit. Not as much as I would have liked. I was attending a conference, so I just had one free day that I kind of drove around a little bit. That house is in a fine area. It's a little marginal. It's a little economically depressed. It's not anything I'm worried about. It's a decent property. The problem is that it is a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house. And as I look at other houses there, as I look at other inventory that comes through in that zip code, 90% of the houses in that area are 3-bedroom, 1-bath. And the outside of it looks extremely average. It looks like a box, right? And so there's just nothing to set it apart. And when you're in a marginal area like that, there's going to be a slightly higher percentage of renters that are questionable. It's just how it goes, right? Well, that's why it's important that you get a property that gets set apart. So that was the mistake I made is, I didn't do my own research. And if I had done my own research, I would have seen that, this property is very average. There's nothing to set it apart. And if I'm going to invest in this more marginal area, which is fine, you can get really good cash flow there, and even it will still appreciate to some degree. So they make fine investments. Just make sure that it's something that has good rental demand. And that was the mistake I made. I bought an average house in a marginal area, right? So that's the third mistake. The fourth mistake related to the buy right formula and making sure that you buy a good turnkey property. This is probably the most common mistake. When I hear horror stories of turnkey properties gone bad, it is almost always related to this mistake, and that is buying a property in a no-go zone. There are areas in every city you do not want to own properties. The crime is too much. A big reason that a lot of these cities in the South and Midwest, the reason that they're so affordable is because there are pockets that are high crime. It's just a fact of life. But the key to understand is that those are pockets. It can spread a little bit, but not as much as you think. You get outside those pockets and everything is fine. But what happens is that there tends to be a little bit of a reputation that a city will get based on some of these pockets. And so the issue is that clearly you're not going to buy with those pockets, but some of those neighboring zip codes will kind of be impacted by that. And so you kind of want to stay away from, where the really bad parts are, the war zones, and then there's neighboring areas, and eventually you get out enough to where, they're just normal working class people living their life, and just like you and me, but their property values are low because they're in these, in this city that has this reputation for a high crime rate. So that's just kind of it's a tangent, but you want to make sure that you're not buying in those areas that don't feel safe. And this is the most common mistake I see, is that when I look at somebody says, oh, I bought like 5 properties in this city and there are always problems. Somebody stole my AC unit, and somebody, broke a window or whatever. Well, when I go and look and ask, well, where did you buy them? And they'll give a zip code. And I'll think back to when I was driving through that zip code, and I'm thinking, well, that's your problem. I would never buy a property there. So that where it comes down to, really knowing the area and knowing that you're buying in a place that, that's maybe just a little marginal and economically depressed, but it's not like, where crime is rampant and you're going to get, people that are just deadbeat tenants and just trying to game the system and whatnot. Now, unfortunately, the only way to really know for sure what an area is like, and if it's a place that feels unsafe and looks unsafe and you're just not getting a good vibe from the community, the only real way is to go out and visit the market and visit that area and tour it yourself. And that's a big reason why I created these virtual buying tours inside my Turnkey Mastery system. This is a big part of letting people hit the ground running and buying properties in areas that they know aren't going to be overly problematic. So I'll share a quick story about one of my students, Suda. I mentioned him in a previous video. He exchanged one of his local rentals with a bunch of equity and used it to buy like a whole lot of out-of-state turnkey rentals. Well, he did a 1031 exchange. And the thing about 1031 exchanges is you have a time limit. You need to buy a certain number, you need to have enough properties under contract that it kind of matches your equity that you are exchanging. And you need to do that within a certain amount of time. Well, after he did this, this was some months after, he had his new properties in place, and he every week on our calls, because I hold weekly calls inside the Turnkey Mastery System, he would be complaining about this one property. This one property just, it went a long time without filling a tenant, and then once he did get a tenant, there were issues. There was some vandalism that was involved. I think his door got broken, his AC unit got busted, and he kept talking about these complaints he was having. And it was just this one property. He had all sorts of others that were just fine. And I finally asked him, I said, Suda, where is this property? And he gave me the zip code. And I was like, dude, what are you doing? Why are you buying there? And he was like, I know, but it was, I had to move quick, and this was, I took all, I had to move quick, and he basically took a chance on one in order to, to get enough under contract. So it was, his hand was forced a little bit, but just, I felt bad for him, but it was just another example of, if you don't follow the buy right formula and make sure that you've got the who, the where, and the what nailed, that you can run into trouble. Now, he's done just fine. All his other properties are just fine, and he eventually did get a tenant in, and again, you have hiccups when you invest in real estate, but they're short-term hiccups, and they're all solvable, and you will solve them, and you will go on to have cash flow and appreciation and all the profit pillars, and he has certainly done that. But what I see from a lot of people online is they'll go and they'll buy one or two properties based only on the turnkey provider, and they bought in a crappy area, and they had problems from day one, and then they just conclude that the methodology sucks. It doesn't suck. You just need to do the proper amount of research and get a little help with that research to make sure that you buy right. Okay, so the last big category of mistakes I see people make all center around the financial analysis side of things. Bad financial analysis, okay? The first mistake that people make in that domain is not running their own numbers, okay? Just relying on the turnkey pro forma numbers. Now, it's okay to use their cost estimates for things like taxes and insurance and things like that, but sometimes they'll skimp on factoring in an estimate for maintenance or vacancy, or they'll just use different numbers than other turnkey providers. And a big reason we run these numbers is so that we can compare properties to each other. And so we need a common set of numbers. And so that's one mistake I see, is that you might see a pro forma and they'll say 8% cash on cash, and there's like nothing there for maintenance or vacancy or anything like that. And so and they'll buy that property over something some other turnkey provider says is 6% cash on cash, but they're actually being honest. And if you were to apply the better numbers to that 8%, it might actually be more like 5%, right? So that's the first mistake, is just run your own numbers. And I in a prior video I talked about how to run the numbers, and I even gave a link to my property valuation calculator. I'll go ahead and throw that in this link as well if you're interested in that. So the second common mistake around the financial analysis is if you just focus on only the year one cash flow. Right? I mean, this is easy to calculate. You take the rent minus the mortgage, minus the taxes and insurance, minus the PM fee. You factor in vacancy and maintenance, and you end up with some number. And that number might not always be that great, especially if you maybe we're in a period of like higher interest rates, and I mean, I know we've been in a higher rate environment for a while, but I mean like it like peaks, because there are times sometimes it'll go up to like 7.5%, pushing 8%, and you punch in the numbers, you're like, oh, this cash flow sucks. Well, you look at that, if you only look at that year one cash flow, then you might be missing a lot, because over time that cash flow will increase. And if you can run the numbers and see how cash flow will double in just a few years, that's a tremendous growth rate. And if you can see that, you are seeing something that not many other people can see. And so this is more a way that you don't want to miss a good property, because there are some properties that are in great areas. There's great appreciation, super good area. It's got really good property management in place. And the only thing that's there, it's like the cash flow is not as high as you'd want to be. Maybe it's like, I've said before, I like to see a minimum of like 5% cash on cash. Maybe this one's only like 3.5 or 4%. But what if it's like a newer property in an A neighborhood? And when I run the cash flow numbers out into the future, I start to see, you know what? I only need to wait till about year 3 before I'm where I want to be with my cash flow. And this is a really good property. I think it's worth taking a flyer on it. So that's the key, is you don't want to just focus on only year 1 cash flow. And that's the second mistake that people make on the financials. So somewhat related to this is the third major problem that people make around the financials of a property. And that is only looking at the cash flow and ignoring the other profit pillars. Okay? You want to look at all 4 profit pillars, because the situation you'll run into here, like we talked about before, you might find a really nice property in a really nice area, and it's probably on the spendier side, right? If it's a newer home that's built in the 90s or 2000s, it's probably a $200,000, $225,000 property, where most of the properties you're probably buying in this city are more like 150, 175. So it's going to be more expensive, but the cash flow is going to be, percentage-wise, it's going to be lower because you're spending more to get into the property. Even though that cash on cash percent might be lower, you're probably going to make that up in the appreciation. Because if it's a new area, or if it's a new home in a newer neighborhood, then instead of just putting in like 2 or 3% appreciation, which you might do in a normal property in a marginal area, you could probably bump that up to 4 to 5% appreciation. And so you make it so that it's more of an appreciation play, right, instead of a cash flow play. And you can mix up your portfolio like that. This is how you can get some diversification. So if you buy that property, the cash on cash might only be 3 or 4%, but if it appreciates 5%, and thanks to your 20% down payment, that 5% gets multiplied by 4, you could be making 20% just on the appreciation. So that is, that's kind of those choices you can make. And you don't really get that full picture unless you look at all of them. So as an example, let's say you had a $150,000 house and a $200,000 house, and they both cash flowed $300 a month after fixed expenses. That $150,000 house is going to be a higher percent return on cash than the $200,000. But does that necessarily mean that you just only want to buy the 150? No. Ideally, speaking personally, I want both. I want both of those, because one is going to be a good cash flow play and the other is going to be a good appreciation play. And like I said, that's how you get some good diversification in your portfolio. So you really want to look at all 4 profit pillars and really assess how each investment is going to help you win, because they can win in multiple ways, remember? Okay, so those are all of the most common mistakes I see investors make when they get into turnkey investing. I want to close out this video by talking about the worst mistake of all, and that is not getting in the game as soon as you possibly can. I talk to so many people that are intrigued by real estate. I tell them about this methodology, and there's a lot that are eager and they jump in and they get started, but there's a lot of more people that just say, you know what, it sounds good, I'm sure it works, but now is just not a good time. Maybe later. I've got too much going on, and I get it. We all are busy, we have busy careers. But the thing about real estate is that time is either working for you or against you. The worst thing you can do is put off getting properties and getting in the game, because as soon as you do, you put a stake in the ground. And from that point on, time's working in your favor. All those property values that are rising, that's benefiting you. All those rents that are rising with inflation, that's benefiting you, while your mortgage payment stays fixed. But if you're not in the game yet, if you don't have those property values just mean that you need to spend more to get in down later. Those rents that keep rising, that just means that that's less room that rents are going to have to rise before the prices outstrip the rents, because values will keep going up. Rents can only go so high, right? Rents can only go so high. And that's what's happened, is there are a lot of markets that were awesome turnkey investments like 5 years ago. that just don't work anymore. There's some markets in Texas and Florida that were just gangbusters. North Carolina, like 5 or 6 years ago, were great. Now all the houses are 350 grand. Their rents don't cover it anymore. So this is a limited opportunity. It's not anything that I don't think is going to go away in the few years. It's probably going to take 10 or 15 or maybe even 20 years, but there's going to come a time when there are no good markets left because the values just keep rising and rising, and rents can only go so high. You see that in your own local market, right? That's the whole reason you can't invest anymore, because the rents only go so high and the property values just outpace that rental income. And if interest rates ever go down again, look out. It's going to be a whole new ball game. So many turnkey providers out there are providing concessions right now. They are providing incentives. I talked about them in some prior videos. They're offering, they're paying 2% of the closing costs, which you can use to buy down your rate. They are offering rate buy downs, so you can, they're just paying a lender directly to lower your rate. They are offering to waive the property management fee for just a year or two. All of these are a function of this high interest rate environment. They're trying to spur demand. If interest rates go down again, demand is going to spike. And when that happens, first of all those good deals are going away, all those incentives go away. But second of all the big boys will come back into the game. And now you're going to be competing with hedge funds and all cash buyers that want to get in on these really good returns. And when I say all cash buyers, I mean they're going to buy with cash and then they'll take their time to refinance. And that's how they'll take advantage of the low interest rates. But they can come in and they can close in like a week. And, if you're getting a bank loan, you really can't compete with that. So that's what I saw during COVID, is that I was trying to buy properties, but it was so hard. And all the leverage was with the sellers. It was hard to find properties that were priced fairly because they kept kind of bumping up the price because demand was, was so high. So you were paying top dollar, and appraisals would come in lower than what you paid for. And some turnkey providers are saying, nope, you got to pay us the whole amount that's under contract. And so, that gets into some of the vetting questions you have to ask turnkey providers and whatnot. So it was such a painful time to buy properties. And yes, the ones that I did get, they're maybe $100 more cash flow than if I were to buy them now. But that doesn't really move the needle. The impressive thing to me is that as I was frantically trying to buy properties, I was looking at other investors in my investor groups I was in who had already bought properties like 2 or 3 years prior. Those guys were sitting pretty because they could just sit back and watch their property values rise, and then they can go and refinance at a much lower rate, pull cash out, and oftentimes were paying the same mortgage payment or even lower. And they were pulling out 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand, and paying lower mortgage payments. It was basically free money. And my takeaway from that is the position I want to be in. And that's the position that you want to be in next time interest rates lower. You don't want to wait to buy until rates are low. You want to buy now and then reap the benefits when rates go low. That's why I always say there literally has never been a better time to invest than right now. Rates are reasonable. No, they're not hyper low, but they're reasonable. Cash flow is there. It's plentiful. And there's lots of incentives and deals to find. But I don't know how much longer it's going to last. I really don't. And, if the economy tanks and the Fed starts playing shenanigans with interest rates again and with mortgage-backed securities and all the stuff it does, man, I want to be in a position of owning as many properties as I can. And that's what I recommend others do as well. So if you're waiting, that's a mistake. Don't make that mistake. Okay, so if you've watched all this and you're eager to get started, which you should be, and you would like to hit the ground running to buy some turnkey investment properties, then I want to talk a little bit about the program that I started called the Turnkey Mastery System. And this is inside my business, Cashflow Engineers. So this is a coaching and education program where I just walk through every step of the property acquisition process. From financing them to finding them, analyzing, managing, protecting, and closing on an investment property And you can do all of that for the first time in just a matter of weeks. And a big part of that is providing a lot of done-for-you research. The best turnkey providers, the best areas, the areas to stay away from, and it's all unbiased research because I am not selling properties. I am not affiliated with any turnkey provider. This is something that I put together because I wanted it for myself. And as I started sharing with my coworkers, they were interested in what I was doing, and so I put this together to share with them, and they had a lot of success, and I've slowly been bringing more people into my community. So I'm putting it out there, and if you want to be a part of it, then there's a link in the description of this video to a free training. If you kind of want to learn about the framework I use to actually buy the properties, you can go through that training. Or if you'd like, if you just want a shortcut and just hop on a call with me, I also have a link to my calendar, and you can just book a call with me. I love talking shop. I love talking about this stuff, in case you can't tell. So I am happy to talk with you. Tell me about your situation. Tell me about your questions and concerns, why you might think this might not work for you. I love talking about this stuff. So those are your options. You can learn more on your own. Reach out to me, book a call, whatever you want to do. In the meantime, keep watching my channel. I got a lot more to share. I will be back with more videos in the future, but yeah, I'm going to wrap this up here and reach out if you need any help. I am happy to lend any help I can. Thanks.